TAM TUK by George Adams. Continued. Chapter 18. I was born in the summer. No one seems to be certain when it was exactly, and we had to invent a date for my ID card and my passport. I don't have many early memories. The first thing I remember is seeing a street. It must have been in Hong Kong, but I know I wasn't born there. It's a crowded street with a sort of flyover and shops opposite, and a few cars, but that's as much as I remember. Does anyone remember anything about their first years? The next thing I remember is my nurse, May. I never remember my mother looking after me. May was a big solid woman from Sichuan with short hair and a big round ruddy face which beamed at me always. She was fond of children, as she did not have any of her own. Our house was a large one in the Peak Road. It's gone now, and there's a block of flats where it used to be, but when I was growing up it was one of the last, which still had 2 stories, a garden, a swing, a room for pets. I had a rabbit, a turtle, and a Siamese cat with blue eyes who would tap on the window of my bedroom to be allowed in from the rain or just because she wanted to be near me. I remember being very happy, alone, cared for, and with the wind running through trees and the soft murmur of traffic beyond them. It was time for school, and there most of my memories begin. I think it's important for you to see how I grew up and how I became the way I am now. From the very first day I knew I was special, as all the girls and boys in the kindergarten, which was just a short drive down the road, seemed rather slow, and to have a lot of things in their lives which struck me as rather odd, like fathers who picked them up and hugged them, and brothers and sisters who stole their toys and played with them. I was always alone. My father is a lawyer, and he was never around. He seemed to be, to watch me from a distance, like something that has been foisted on him. My mother was kind, but never very close to me. Should I tell you why now? You probably know. I was adopted. I suppose many of the children who are adopted become like a normal child in a family, but looking back, I always knew that my parents were somewhere else. I was being looked after, but I wasn't really in a family. Yet I wasn't really touched by a sense of loss. I didn't know anything different. I look back now and only feel a terrible longing for something. I have a feeling not of loss, but of a presence which was far, far away. That's not the same thing. Somewhere I knew there was someone who wanted me, and I used to invent a whole family for myself. I was a princess who had been lost. My favorite fairy story was the ugly duckling, but I was never really ugly. I felt that I would turn into something else when I grew older. It was something I knew without really knowing it, a feeling I had inside. It gave me comfort. I'll tell you 2 stories to indicate how things were for me then. I remember a birthday party. I must have been about 6 or 7. The party was at home, of course, and all the kids from my school class were invited. My mother had ordered food from a hotel in town, and the biggest cake I'd ever seen, with my name on it in pink icing and a gold card springing up from it bearing my age. The kids dutifully arrived and strode around the house looking at everything, picking up all the objects which sadly had nothing of childhood in them. The whole house was so adult. My bedroom was also so adult, neat and clean, and all the toys neatly packed into those little plastic boxes people use for storing their winter things. One girl began to cry. May called us down into the living room for the party. and the kids tried to eat the vol au vents and cream puffs, but they couldn't. The cola went round, and May started to make us all sing, but the kids didn't want to. They started throwing the food around out of boredom, and they wanted to go home. I was expecting my mother and father to arrive just after the party started, but they never came. The kids left, and I gave them little going-away presents at the door, each tied with a gold ribbon, and all containing the same educational Fisher-Price toy. I never heard of the toys again. I think they were too young for them, all the sort you give to babies. Another time, I'm in Repulse Bay, and besides us, on the beach, there's a family from one of the housing estates with 3 noisy kids in cheap, ill-fitting little bathing trousers. It's a beautiful day. The wind must have been blowing from the south. There were only light streaks of cloud in the sky, and the beach was full of people. Perhaps it was a public holiday or some time in the school summer vacation. The kids are all as happy as hell to be with their parents, to be away from home and eating snacks and paddling in the water. I walk over to 2 of them and say hello, and we start to play on the sand. I have a bucket and a spade, and the kids take turns to turn over little slabs of sand from the bucket and build a ring around me. I think it's fun. It stays in my mind as one of the happiest moments of my life, just sitting there in the sunshine, playing with 2 kids who never had half or even a quarter of what I had in life. Then my father comes over, and he wrenches the bucket and spade out of the hands of the kids and carries me back to where he and my mother are sitting. The kids begin to cry, and my father says something to me I will never forget. They should have their own toys. I feel something die in me. I sit for a long time and watch the kids at play. The looks on their faces as they stare back at me are horrible. For the first time in my life, I cry inside, silent tears running through my mind, but my face remains still and dry and strong. Life as a child is what you live in your parents' house. And only much later do you find out what you missed, what was strange, what didn't add up. Children are perfectly adaptive and can even learn to live without love. I got all my love from May. Have you ever read that story, David Copperfield and Peggotty? She was my Peggotty, and my father was certainly Mr. Murdstone, but without the beatings. I suppose he was the ultimate husband of convenience for my mother. He knew what to say when people called, and he knew how to be quiet when he accompanied my mother to all her social outings. He had his little girls here and there, but I think they were all bought, just as he had been bought. He did hardly any work and spent most of his time in Thailand or Taiwan on spurious business trips, but he never said what the business was. He was terribly vain, a short, thin man with hardly any shoulders or legs to speak of. His suits were too long in the trousers and too wide at the top. I hated his stomach, which seemed to be out of proportion to the rest of him. He loved ties of all description and sometimes wore a bow tie. That's when I hated him most of all. I think he had a secret passion towards me, but never expressed it. Everything about him was underhand, unnatural, and somehow, as I said, paid for. He was incapable of any natural expression of anything except his greed. My mother, what can I say except that she is as cold as anything? anything you see still breathing. But how can you hate your mother? It kills you inside if you do that. So, despite everything, I learned to love her, to want to please her, and as much as she could, she reciprocated. She kissed me sometimes, a dry and wrinkled kiss, I always thought, as if she were puckering her lips and pressing them upon me despite herself. I think she really wanted a child of her own, and she had tried once to make me hers, but she knew it wouldn't work. She didn't have it in her. The time came when I began secondary school in England. I was one of the rich orphans bundled onto a plane and sent to proxy mothers and fathers on the other side of the world because it was good for me in the end, they said. There I stood at TUK airport like a child of the Kindertransport, a bundle in flannel too hot for Hong Kong, and blue tights which I took off in the toilets as a rare demonstration of truculence and rebellion. Of course, mother and father were too busy to come and see me off. May stood at the barrier as all the documents for an unaccompanied minor were inspected by the immigration officials, and a Cathay Pacific escort in crimson uniform took my hand. I remember the lanolin on her hand. I looked so young, like all Chinese girls, so they offered me silly presents on board, like a drawing book and crayons. I never learned how to draw. I preferred reading. The hostesses thought me strange, sitting there next to an oversized French lady, jealous of her personal space and imbibing whiskey, as I read Jane Austen's Emma. I loved the ordered world of Jane Austen, where the expression of love always came by restrained surprise. To be taken from the world of Hong Kong to a hamlet in Cumbria, where the biggest building is my school. To join the daughters of admirals and career civil servants, tycoons, barristers and judges, to be surrounded by sheep and hills and fresh air, to grow into the future wife of a rich young man, something in the city or one of the professions, they all seemed to hope. One girl arrived in a helicopter. They were all so capable, so tall, so sophisticated. I was the Chinese Pooh Bear, the relatively round-faced little sweetheart they wanted to hug and lift up to the netball hoop. There were other Chinese girls, of course. Some of them had been in private schools abroad from the age of 7. They weren't as much in love with the sheep as I was. I would leave the dorm in my long school coat and brave the wind and rain of Bronte country to go see the sheep sitting in the field. They were as innocent and sweet and stupid as many of the people I would later see in life. But they had, the sheep I mean, they had more grace and tenacity than people. The school was a very physical place, with great emphasis placed on sports of all kinds. Hockey and rugby were particularly aggressive, and I regularly dislocated my arm, and I once actually broke my leg. Such injuries were accepted as natural events in the formation of the Northton girl. I remember freezing at the first gusts of winter and wondering if people in England were of another biology, a hardier race with their own fur on the inside and a special heating system deep in their bones. How weak the Chinese are in Hong Kong, where temperatures never descend for long under 20 degrees centigrade, and where snow and frost and bitter cold are things they only see on their flat panel TVs. I became a popular girl, in fact, because for the first time in my life I felt like I had a family. I loved just being with other girls, and I blossomed inside. There was nothing I would not do for my friends. To have another friend was something wonderful for me. One girl's particular manner of expressing her friendship was strange to me, but even that I accepted. She would run into my room, even when I was asleep, and throw herself on me and hug me just to relieve some sort of tension. I submitted to her wild display of affection. I don't think there was anything lesbian about it, and there was never anything sexual. I loved her spontaneous embrace, the open show of affection. I grew up. I was a very capable student. Girls always got A's at this school, and I was one of them. I found maths and economics easier than anything. It seemed to be bred in my bone. Soon our social life began. We were bused to boys' schools, where we were groped and fondled by tall teenage lads with all the delicacy of a fishmonger handling fish. Scandalous things went on in those social gatherings, with the pop music and the soft drinks and the trays of sausage rolls. We were chaperoned by our teachers, but there were always stories of girls discovered in intimate embrace in storerooms and toilets and car parks. I was developing into a rather presentable and pretty young piece of exotica, with my big brown eyes and cherubic face. Boys pestered me for my phone number and would send me pager messages and then SMSs when I had my own portable. I never warmed to any of them. Western boys seemed to me to be biological oddities, young wild lions in clothes. But I did sometimes fantasize about more intimate involvement with them.